Hi there, Glocal citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, coming to you from, I'm back, and it's the Harmattan, as most West Africans say. Yes, so I just arrived back in Accra. I am so happy for the sun and the heat. However, you might hear a little bit of congestion voice because that dust, it does not relent. It is what it is. I'm happy. I cannot complain about anything. I just am talking about the weather as we usually do on the podcast. And so my guest knows a little bit about this herself because she is in the region and she's doing some fabulous things, which we'll get into in the conversation. And let me start with her bio. She is the co-founder and CEO of Emergency Response Africa, ERA, a health tech company revolutionizing access to emergency care in Africa, beginning with Nigeria. With over 15 years of experience across healthcare marketing and consulting in Nigeria, the US, and Canada, she brings a dynamic and cross-sectoral approach to solving complex health challenges. As a certified first responder with the Canadian Red Cross, she is passionate about Africa's rising tech ecosystem and making fast, reliable emergency medical care accessible to all Africans using technology. Recognized for her innovation and impact, she is a recipient of the Aurora Tech Award, the Google Black Founders Fund, and WISCAR, WISCAR, we'll find out more about what WISCAR stands for, Grace Alele-Williams Alumni Impact Award. Folake, Owodunni, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
Wonderful. Let's get started. Where are you from? Where are you local? And what is your craft?
Okay, thank you. Good question. So I'm from Nigeria, born and raised. Where am I local? I'm currently local in Nigeria and have been for a bit, but I do sort of live between two worlds, Nigeria and Canada.
Okay. So before you get to your craft, I want to ask, Nigeria is big and so is Canada. Mm-hmm. So where is your from and where is your local in this big country that is Nigeria and Canada?
So I was born in Lagos. I'm from Ogun State, which is next to Lagos. Mm-hmm. But I am in Lagos right now and mostly spend my Nigerian time in Lagos. In Canada, I'm in Ontario in a city called Kitchener. People maybe more so know Kitchener-Waterloo.
Ah, okay. I've heard of Kitchener and I've heard of Waterloo.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so tell us, what is your craft?
That's an interesting question. What do I do? I'm trying to solve a problem. So maybe if I was to answer that question in one sentence, I'm a problem solver with a particular interest in healthcare. So I'm trying to solve the emergency care problem that we have in Nigeria, where people just don't get help on time.
I too would say my craft is problem solving in a lot of ways. And that comes from my engineering background. So I think that I look at the world as an opportunity to make it better. And it is through solving problems, those challenges that are life and death sometimes, or just comfort and, discomfort. So let's dive in. Let's talk about this healthcare challenge. Tell us, how did it come to you? How and why did this become your passion?
There are two parts to it. I think the first part is that really from childhood, I've always thought about healthcare. I'm not sure why, because I think the trigger was seeing a lot of poverty around me. But somehow, I guess maybe, Africans, we only think of 5 career options, your doctor, lawyer, and, there are a few. And for me, I think being a doctor was like the way to fix the problem that I saw before me. And so really from childhood, I always had in mind that I wanted to study medicine and be a doctor and practice. But I also joke that I had an early life crisis sometime in my late teens, early 20s. And decided not to go down the clinical path and instead, pursued public health. So from like an interest point of view, I've always been interested in healthcare. I've always thought about healthcare and wanted to be in that space. On the flip side, I had a personal experience that got me thinking about emergency healthcare specifically. And so this was back in 2017. I have 2 kids, and my son at the time was about 1.5 years old. And it was just, one of those first time parent situations. My husband happened to have traveled for work. He never travels for work, or he never did at that point. But that one night, he traveled for work, and my son just woke up and was obviously in a lot of pain and just screaming. And, honestly, I couldn't figure out what was wrong. I'm trying to check him and see what's going on. I couldn't figure it out. And of course, as a toddler, he can't really articulate the problem. All of this happened in Canada, right? So we were already living in Canada at this point. And so the only thing that I could think of doing was call 911. And so I did. And, for Nigerians, and I think, a decent number of Africans, 911 is like a thing you see in the movies or in the TV show. It's not a real part of your daily life. And so I think even the act of calling 911 already felt different. It was a lot, right? But I did because I needed to. And I just, remember truly having my mind blown by everything that happened after, right? So the dispatcher that I was talking to on the phone and the questions that they asked and the instructions that they provided and just the level of calm, the two paramedics that showed up at our apartment, maybe 10 minutes later, I don't remember the exact time, but quickly, and they came with their stretcher and all this equipment, and, they jumped into action and started checking him and doing all these things. And at the end of the day, it turned out that it wasn't life-threatening. He wasn't going to die. It was, something to do with his ear, some inflammation. So very painful, right, for a child. Scary from a parent perspective, but again, right, not life-threatening. But I think what then really stood out to me was at the end of it, they were like, look, because, of what it is, giving him some medicine, he's calmed down, he's okay. You really don't need to get into the ambulance and ride to the emergency room. You're just going to go there and wait. Instead, do blah, blah, blah. And that was it. And then they left. And that was the end. And I remember thinking, man, if the same situation had happened in Nigeria, it would have just been a different experience, right? So, and it always sounds funny, but I feel like every time I tell this story, people can so relate, right? First of all, I would have had to go and knock on my neighbor's door and be like, hey, please, can you come and, drive us to the hospital? Because I wouldn't even think about which number do I call, in order to get an ambulance? And then, the neighbor, somebody has to move their car for somebody else to come out. But then, okay, let's say you're...
Oh, right.
We all know, we all know. Right? And then, on the way, I'm thinking, okay, which hospital do we go to? And at the time, so before I relocated to Canada, my husband and I lived in an apartment in a specific estate, and they had this hospital that was really close by, but it had a really bad reputation. People always say that if you go in alive, you don't come out alive. So again, I'm thinking if I'm in that type of situation, I would be terrified to take him to the closest available hospital because I don't know what I'm going to meet, right? Versus, going somewhere else and not being sure either. So the more I thought about that particular situation and how differently it would have looked if it had happened in Nigeria, I think the more obsessed I became with the question of, well, what do people do when they have an emergency? How do they address it? And so I started researching, and, my research was reading stuff online, looking for articles, journal articles, but also just news items, talking to some experts in the space. I remember Dr. Ola Brown was one of the first people that I spoke to. And she gave some really, really good insight, from her experience with her sister. And I remembered her because I had actually gone to secondary school with her younger sister, I think. And so, I remember the situation and how that led to, her starting flying doctors and thinking, okay, here's an expert, someone I can talk to. And she gave some really good insights. But I think, all of that led me down a path where it was very, very, very clear that we didn't have a good system in place. There had been attempts, both public and private sector driven attempts, but nothing that seems to have lasted, nothing that was in any way scalable or accessible to the majority of the population. And so at the end of the day, when people have emergencies, they still call, their neighbor. They still rely on the taxi driver, maybe Uber these days, right? They do whatever they can to get to care. And the challenge is oftentimes that isn't necessarily in the best interest of the patient. And so that's the trigger, that set me on what has now been a 7-year journey, which is crazy. But I'm super grateful for the process and the learning so far.
Yeah, nice. Diving a little bit deeper now. So you had this idea, you had a spark, and then it needed to get to reality. So what was that journey like? So it was just you and you're having this idea. How did you get to the point of, I'm actually going to do this now? And to some extent, it's kind of the why, the where question. So how did you also come to be living, working, and playing back in Nigeria?
Yeah, I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version because it's so I would say like the idea first, all of that kind of came, within a couple of years of that incident that I mentioned, right? But in that window of time, I happened to talk to a friend who's Nigerian who had done a master's program in the University of Waterloo. And it just sounded really interesting. It was this program, Masters in Business, Entrepreneurship, and Technology. And it was very much about, how do you go from an idea or a concept into a viable venture? And, what are all the things that you need to think about and do? And it just sounded really, really practical to me. And so I was pretty excited. It happened that I was working at the university. And so I was able to just like start taking the program. But in my first term, I then met a lady who is now my co-founder. And she was actually from Ghana, so from Accra. And, we got talking and I shared this idea, right? This really, really high level, loose idea. And instantly she connected because she had actually lost her grandmother in Accra because they couldn't get help to her on time. And so she understood really quickly that this was a massive problem. People are losing people on a daily basis. And it's not just a Nigeria issue. It's not even just a Ghana issue. This is very much an Africa-wide developing market problem. And so I think we connected, on that. And, she then had, the technology background. I had the public health background. And so we felt like, okay, here's a really interesting skill set mix that could potentially help with solving this problem. And so I think, we sort of took that and started working together to build out this idea. And like I mentioned, we'd done a lot of research. So I think for me, it was really clear that previous attempts that hadn't worked and hadn't lasted were because the system seemed to be importing models the West, and trying to make them work in an environment that had almost nothing to support that system. And so I think, we were like, okay, well, can we leverage technology to make things more efficient? Can we leverage the power of the community to, sort of tap into what people are already doing? Just can we think about this a bit differently and come up with a solution that's maybe a little bit more tailored to our environment. And so it was, again, just on the basis of that we started shaping out what Emergency Response Africa has become. And I guess if I just had to summarize it, it's really about connecting people to help as quickly as possible through the largest network of first responders, ambulances, and hospitals, all powered by technology. That's the goal. And so it means, if you're here and you have, an emergency, we should be able ideally to find someone that's close to you to come and be that first layer of response. If you need an ambulance, we get an ambulance that's close to you to pick you up and take you to a hospital that is both close to you and suited for your emergency, right? And that type of system can then be flexible, whether you're talking about central Lagos, which is really, urban and very traffic heavy, or you're talking about a more rural, part of the country where actually the community is the only response you're likely to see. Either way, right, we should be able to create a system, a network that actually functions and addresses the emergencies that come up. So really, I think we started through that program. That program was really helpful in just, thinking through and finding our first funding, testing the ideas out. And then, I think come 2021, so all of this was happening between, I would say, like 2019 and 2021. 2021, we made the sort of big decision to actually launch our operations fully. And so, I started doing a lot of shuttling between Canada and Nigeria. And yeah, I have basically sort of put myself here trying to make this dream a reality. Yeah.
Yeah. So of your team, so is your co-founder also in Nigeria, or is she still in Canada, or is she in Accra?
So she's in Canada. Although I'm now, team go to Accra. Don't tell her I said this, and I guess this you might hear anyway. But yeah, so no, she's in Canada.
Okay.
Comes to Nigeria from time to time.
Okay. I mean, we're with a health tech company. It's all about the ability to do things with tech, so that makes quite a bit of sense. So tell us now. You've spoken about how you got to this point of launch. So tell us a little bit more about what your customer profile is, because when we think about 911, we know it as a public good, and that's why taxpayer dollars make sure that it works well, because certain societies, I won't say African societies, are not invested, but we've kind of forgotten about the human-centeredness of our societies. How do you then create something that kind of is equal access at the same time as, serving the need to fund a business? What does your customer acquisition profile, all of that look like?
I think the first thing I'll say is it's hard, right? The truth is my job and life would be much, much easier if I picked one. I would say it's been a battle and a consideration from really the beginning. We have 4 values, and one of them is for everyone. It literally says for everyone. And it was the one that we got the most pushback on, as people got to know the business. How can you have a value that says for everyone? Nothing is for everyone, maybe except air. And we understood and agreed fundamentally that it is impossible for a business to truly be for everyone. And I think for us, that's why, we consider ourselves a social enterprise and always will, because the behavior that allows us to live that value is we will find resources and partners and opportunities that allow us to provide the service to people who may not be able to afford it, but still get it, right? So for us, that has meant, working alongside the government. That has meant, finding development partners or foundations that want to see certain outcomes, right? And need a vehicle or a partner like us to be able to deliver those outcomes. And so going back to your question around customer profile and just, kind of how this works from a money perspective, we have traditionally done our work by funding it through generating revenue. So we charge for our services. We partner with corporate organizations predominantly. If you think about the typical profile of such an organization, they will usually be in a high risk sector. So it could be anything from, logistics and manufacturing to oil and gas, or, what I would call congregate settings. So places where there's of people in one place. So it could be a school, it could be a warehouse. Those are the people for whom there's usually an immediate need for emergency services. And so that's kind of on the corporate side. And we charge for those services, we generate revenue, and that, certainly helps with the business sustainability. We do also serve individuals. So if someone reaches out to use the service, they absolutely can, and they can pay for it. We have partnerships with several insurance companies, other health tech companies as well. So if you think about a telemedicine organization, right? They are providing telemedicine, and that's great. But at some point, there will be those patients that need that physical response. And so we're able to partner with them and provide those services. So that's kind of all part of how we make money as an organization. At the end of the day, though, if I had to pick a number, I would say that does not even come close to maybe 10% of the population that would fall within those categories. And that 10 is probably really, really generous, right? So you have still 90+% who in a million years could never pull out, 65,000 naira, 70,000 naira for a single ambulance ride. We're not talking about the hospital fees, right? We're talking about pre-hospital care. And so naturally, it means that as a business, our market is very limited. Now, I'm of the belief in market creation, right? So markets get created by either policy or innovative models. There are lots of things that serve to create markets. And I think that this space is actively moving in that direction. And there are good reasons to believe that. But what it means, right, until that happens at scale, is that for those people who cannot afford the service, we either have to find others who can pay for it, and we do, or we can find ways to deliver it at a rate that is affordable, what they can actually afford to pay. And we also do that. So just, to kind of summarize and answer your question, it is hard to run this as a business. We've had many, many people say, like, why don't you just do it as an NGO? And that's a very fair question and a very reasonable thing to have done. We could have done that. But I also believe that being able to do both, generate revenue from the parts where we can truly exchange value, but also get either grants or sponsorships or partnerships for the places where people just need that help. I think that is actually the best of both worlds. And that's really what we've really tried to wrestle to do.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. I think there's something that you also do, this is just my understanding is, and is a big key piece of bridging that gap, and that's capacity building. So you yourself are a certified CPR first responder. And so to the extent that when I first moved here, this was one of my major challenges is thinking about, okay, what is the emergency situation? Like, how do we get people? And the first thing I did was I went to the Red Cross here and asked them, well, how are you training? Oh, well, we only really train businesses and organizations. So that access to the community to be able to respond is a huge deficit. And so tell us more about what your vision is for that capacity building on the community level throughout, even because I feel like that's the first line of emergency response is just like you said, I didn't even know, but the community.
100%. I mean, the reality is when an emergency happens, the closest people are not the professionals, right? Like they're not the people who have gone through all the years of training to be able to come and give you high quality emergency care. So the people around you will often determine whether you live or die, depending on your condition. And so you're absolutely right. It is really, again, everybody has to be sustainable. So I completely understand an organization saying, oh, we only train corporates or we only train groups, because again, that is where the revenue is and there's a clear exchange of value. And we do that. We have, we've trained some really awesome, like major brands in Nigeria. I won't bother like naming them. So that's for us, that's an important line of business. And we do that. And that's great. At the same time, again, going back to recognizing the 90+% that will not be able to access the private service, capacity building at the community level is hugely important for us. And it takes two forms. The first is creating what we call community-based first responders. They are essentially lay people like you and I. We don't have a medical background. We're not clinicians in any way, but we have the capacity to learn some basic skills that allow us to be useful in the time of an emergency. And useful could be starting with comforting, putting a person in a recovery position, just keeping the crowd back. But useful could also be administering, CPR and actually core first aid. So a community first responder, their number one goal is to be useful when an emergency happens. The opposite of useful, so I'm not going to say it, but the opposite, is pulling out the phones and making videos. It's, carrying people in ways that are honestly just, sealing their fate. It's doing all the things that really don't increase the person's chances of survival. And so we train community first responders through, again, partnerships, right? So we identify foundations, we identify, organizations, even things like churches, religious bodies, right? Like associations. Those are all platforms on which a subset of people can be selected as community first responders and then trained. Now, because we leverage technology as much as possible, we also try to create a community out of those first responders, which then makes it easier to be able to communicate with them and dispatch them and, all of those things. Government's another key partner for that. So I'll give maybe a quick example. One of the states that we've done some work in is Ogun State. And Ogun State, was interesting because what they really cared about, their honorable commissioner is a really, really amazing person. She's also interestingly from the diaspora who's, come to live in the area as commissioner, but they really cared about lowering the maternal mortality rate. And, we saw that, again, emergency response, emergency transport was a key part of the solution. And so through working in the community, they have what they call the ward development committees, we were able to get them to actually nominate youths from within the communities that we then trained as first responders. And then the government actually gave them vehicles, so tricycle ambulances that they could drive and use to pick up women who were maybe experiencing an obstetric emergency and take them to the community health centers. And if they need to go to a general hospital, they can. In some cases, they can actually be passed into the bigger ambulance system. So all of those, really were about creating a system, but the starting point was people in the communities actually being trained as first responders, given the skills, given the tools, given the knowledge, right? So that's one, because I think there were two ways. So that's kind of the core way. The second is actually just public education. It is so important, so overlooked, right? Like, people just need to know how to recognize an emergency. People just need to know that, to activate what's called the chain of survival, I just need to do, these 2 or 3 things. Even if I don't do anything else, if I do just those things, that's useful, right? So one of the things that we do is we will engage in local, sort of very, I guess they call it like hyper local communications. That could be creating a jingle in the local language. And you guys probably have it in Ghana. These like buses, trucks that have like speakers on top of them, and they just go through the markets, right? Blasting out information. So that is one channel. Radio is another really valuable channel. Television is, but of course, some of those are pretty expensive. Billboard, what we call bus wrapping, right? So you have, all these like public transport buses, and you just put a thing on them and people see it. So those are the tools that get the message into people's minds. And what we found was, by collecting data at the baseline, you can start to look and see, are people actually growing in knowledge? Are they increasing in their understanding of how to recognize an emergency? For example, we asked pregnant women, I think there were maybe 9 or 13, can't remember the exact number, symptoms that could indicate an obstetric emergency. And people could only consistently identify one, which is, bleeding, right? Which makes it straightforward. But there are so many others, and they do not know, which meant that you can have the system, the emergency response system, that's ready to pick them up. But if they never identify that an emergency is actually happening or coming, and they don't use that system early enough, the result is the same. And so, yes, creating that network of community-based first responders, but also public education, just getting people to recognize when something is happening and being able to actually take action. Call a number. And, the number is a whole different conversation, but we'll leave that aside.
Right. Yeah. So, well, kind of speaking on that same train of thought, when you think about when does this need to start, right? Because there are situations where children call 911 in other countries. So when you think about how that happens, there's this policy aspect, and then there's the practical logistics side and all of that. So tell us a little bit more about how you are intersecting with the policy aspect of this to enable your work and to enable it across borders as well. Like, is that a consideration when you think about it? Because as a tech company, you could white label your technology to a number of other jurisdictions, et cetera, et cetera. So depending on what's going on in the policy environment, that would be the question to ask.
Policy is a big, big, big part of what shapes whether this market exists or does not exist, right? And it also shapes the role that the private sector can play. And so from that lens, we've always, recognized that we have to be involved in policy. We've built relationships over time at, both state levels and federal levels. And it's not easy, right? At the end of the day, again, if you're running a business, you're always going to be torn in 2 directions. Policy work is slow work. It is time consuming. It costs money. It requires your attention. And those are very difficult things to sacrifice when you're also trying to build a business, right? So again, these are the struggles. These are the real, true challenges that I know certainly I feel on a daily basis. But again, I also believe that you can't overlook policy because it determines the future of this space. And so we've built relationships, we engage, we continue to engage. One of our priorities this year is actually to engage in collective action. So right now, there isn't really a way for all of the people involved in pre-hospital care to work together to shape policy. And I will say kudos to some of the government officials at the federal level who have a responsibility, for shaping what the national level program looks like. They have been making efforts to create a system that others can plug into. How, it will all shape out, I choose to be optimistic, but I feel like probably more than ever before, we're in a position where we could actually land on something that does work. And so, I hold on to optimism, but I think from our perspective, it's really just about relationship building, trying to stay close to what's happening, trying to be a part of what's happening and help to shape it while also balancing the need to be a business and survive and all of that. So I think maybe the only thing I'll add to that is the importance of data, generating evidence. There is simply not enough evidence around, like everything I'm saying to you is technically a hypothesis about what will solve this problem. And the only way to prove a hypothesis is to test it rigorously, right? Collect data that indeed confirms that your hypothesis was correct. And the reality is there's just not a ton of data. And so again, as a company, we've committed to generating that evidence and publishing that evidence. In fact, we just had one paper accepted at the African Journal for Emergency Medicine. Hopefully it will be available soon.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but it's just whatever work we do, we're thinking, okay, how can we get, some sort of publication out of this? How can we add to the discourse? How can we create something that can help to build the space and also help people to learn over time? We are learning, let others learn as well, right? And again, this is where partners becomes so important. We cannot do this work, without the resources, and that's why partners are hugely important. So anyway, I mean, policy is important. We can't avoid it. We have to be a part of shaping it.
Sure. And so when you think about your strategy in the next 5 years, where do you see yourselves? What other markets? What have you started thinking about them? How is that now becoming
absolutely real? I mean, you said something that is very, very near and dear to our hearts, right? Like our technology is something that we've really built over the last 5.5, 6 years. And really built something, I would say, spectacular. And I'm not given to like overly, flourishy words. It's really, really good. And the reason that it's really, really good is because it was built in this environment for this environment. And I can tell you that, what works really well in Lagos is gonna be absolutely useless when you get to somewhere not even that far out. And so a system that can adapt depending on where people are and the nature of, technology that they have access to is hugely important. And I know for a fact that there are very, very, very few systems, if any. I won't say there are none because I don't know what's happening in all of the world, but there are very few systems that can do that. And so when I think of strategy and I think of where we want to be 5 years from now, absolutely, our name is intentional. We're Emergency Response Africa. So our goal, even though Nigeria is a starting point, the goal is to have an organization that works across the continent and is able to help save lives across the continent, whether we're talking about a city center or out in the field somewhere. And in order for that to happen, I think, again, I keep saying partnerships. Partnerships are crucial. So how we expand into other markets, again, we're going to be leveraging partnerships, local knowledge. Technology is going to be a big part of that as well. So taking our platform and being able to white label it or license it out. And so it's something that we're already testing in different ways. We have a few partners that we've kind of done some formats of that with. So it's something we're very open to. And so if there's, maybe people that are listening to your podcast that are thinking, hey, I want to be able to do this. Maybe I have, the local knowledge and I have the local partners and I have the resources, but actually I don't have the technology piece. And, that's kind of what we would 100% be open to, exploring a partnership like that. But I think the last piece, when we think about like 5 years from now, is really understanding that emergency care, especially pre-hospital care, is a part of life. It's a part of every interaction. I don't know how else to explain it. And so finding ways to make it available as a part of our everyday products and services, that is our goal. And so for us, that means that as long as you have a phone, you should be able to access the service. So is there a world where the telcos take this up as a tool or a benefit for using their service? Maybe it's financial services, insurance products. Like there's so many different avenues for people to be able to access this. And I think for us, those are the things that we are proactively thinking about. And those are the types of partnerships, that we're actively pursuing. So yeah, I would say we are thinking about other markets. I mean, Ghana is kind of a, first choice next market because we are literally, our organization is half Ghanaian. But I would say, yeah, we are actively thinking about what the other markets would be. And our hope is that not even 5 years, I would say within the next 2 to 3 years, we are in an.
And that helps me to think about Glocal Speak because we're talking about other markets. So we're interested in a word or phrase or saying that's a meaningful part of your local experience and why or how you've come to value it as Glocal Speak. Now, that could be your local in Nigeria or your local in Canada or somewhere else where you have felt part of a community and here's something that stays with you.
So the word that comes to mind, doesn't sound, local at all. But I think it's definitely the most meaningful to me. And that word is systems. And I think it's because this work has really taught me the interconnectedness of everything and how any attempt to solve a complex problem will very quickly reveal to you just how much of a system we live in and how pulling one lever, you think it's going to have one effect and it has a whole completely different effect somewhere else down the line that you could never have foreseen. And it is really difficult to map that and predict that and then predictably influence that. And I think that applies really globally, right? Like it's not just a thing here. But I would say like that word is meaningful to me because, and I got this from a talk that I attended by an author that I really love. He wrote this book called Prosperity Paradox. I don't know if you've heard it, but he gave a talk, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago. And he said a quote from a book that has stayed with me ever since. And he said that if you understand, his name is Efosa Ojomo, I should have said. But he said that, if you understand the rate of change of systems, you won't give up too early or too quickly, something along those lines. And there are not many times, right, where you're sitting in a session with probably like 200, 300 people. And you're like, that was for me, right? That was 100% for me. And I think that it came at a time where I was weary, right? Not just like tired, but like bone weary, like I'm done. I don't know how much longer I can do this. And I think that it really spoke to me because it was a reminder that a system is not a unit. It's not one thing. It's not even a few things added together because of all the interconnectedness again, right? Like you can't predict, you can't see how it's all going to turn out. And therefore systems don't change quickly. And so recognizing that the work that we're doing is systems work has allowed me to take on a higher degree of patience. And it has also helped me to be clear about who I need to be working with and talking to and thinking with. Our partners cannot be impatient people. Our investors cannot be impatient people. They need to be that understand the rate of change of systems. And so that I think is my word because I think it applies, sort of across life, but certainly the work that we do.
I love that because I think it hits on two thoughts that I have on my notes. And one is thinking about what your vision is for your workforce. So when you look at who is working now, what is the vision for the workforce that supports it? And then also linked to that is the ideal ecosystem that scales this type of business.
Interesting questions. I think vision for the workforce, I personally would really, really love to give the people that have trained in pre-hospital care a world where they can use their skills and they can derive the joy of actually saving a life. And I'm saying this because in Nigeria right now, there's one institution that's like accredited or recognized for training paramedics. So let's talk about that specifically. There are a few others, but there's this one, and they produce good talent. Most of them will come out of school, and if they don't go abroad immediately or like quickly, will end up working in non-EMS roles. So they might be in a hospital helping to move patients. They might just go on and do something else completely. There's lots of things they may end up doing. But I think for me, one of the most encouraging things has been to have, paramedics from different, sort of times or graduating classes, basically say like, wow, like I'm grateful that you guys exist because I finally get to do what I trained to do. I finally get to experience what it's like. And there aren't many places that they can. And we're tiny in the grand scheme of things, if we're being honest. We do not do anywhere near what we would love to be doing. And so that tells you that even with our teeny tiny size, we're already filling a gap for this workforce. But then the bigger picture is that if today, suddenly, Nigeria had all the money in the world to put together this rock star EMS system, we wouldn't have the people to staff it appropriately. And so there's still a big need and a big gap in terms of training. Even, in my story at the beginning, I talked about the medical dispatcher that I spoke to and just calm and the process of the question. And, it just, that was part of the experience. And there is no school for medical dispatching in Nigeria. Maybe,
Yeah.
I'm guessing maybe South Africa, maybe Kenya, I don't know. But no, that's not a thing. And so our team, we have trained our medical dispatchers internally. We have gone and bought the textbook, Principles of Emergency Medical Dispatch, and used the textbook to train in-house. And I'm saying that to say, like, again, right, sometimes I think especially when companies, startups fail, people are quick to judge. And yes, there's many issues and mismanagement, no doubt, but there's also the burden of having to do everything.
Everything, yes.
With little support, right? And so I'm just saying that to say, like, vision absolutely for the workforce is just to create a space where people can learn and they can get skills, but they can actually use those skills and they can earn well. I can tell you honestly, they're not earning well enough now. And I only wish I had plenty more money. I would happily, share it. In order to support it, in order for it to be sustainable, we have to build the whole system, right? So
I hear you. I hear you. And I can't leave a conversation with a health tech company without asking about that thing that we're all talking about, which is AI. So I'm a firm believer that actually AI in healthcare is one of the best applications, right? As opposed to some of these other things we're using for it. As a partner with a trained physician, I think it's a great resource for that. So where do you see AI being integrated, or is it possible? What are your thoughts on it for your particular work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are many channels for AI to play a role. And there's some that we're already exploring right now, which I won't talk too much about. But I think there's one that is simple. It's simple enough, but maybe we're not thinking about it enough. Just getting people access, like locally, like languages, being able to
Yes.
communicate. And if you think about the problem with an emergency, right, is that people are under a great deal of pressure. People are maybe not necessarily educated enough to communicate effectively. And you just, there's just issues around like communication. And so I think that there's a big role that AI can play in enhancing the communication that happens in an emergency. So whether that's translating what somebody is saying because of a language barrier, or even, taking that information and sending it to the responder out in the field in a way that they can digest and they can respond, or capturing the notes and the data around the patient and making sure that the healthcare facility has it, in a way that, again, they can digest and receive and respond. I think there's a big role that AI can play in all of that. And I think for us, those are things that we're actively thinking about and exploring and looking at how to integrate into our platform, again, so that we're talking about a solution that honestly can work wherever, right? Like it doesn't only have to be in Lagos where they speak English. If somebody only speaks Pidgin, or if somebody only speaks, I don't know, let's say in Ghana, Twi, like they should be able to communicate in an emergency, right? So, I mean, that's a very, very simplistic, when it comes to AI, but I think there's absolutely a whole lot that AI can do. 100%.
Yeah, I love that application in particular, because I think we don't put enough emphasis on the fact that we are so many people. And if we could just get to that communication,
100%.
so many barriers drop.
100%.
Yeah. So let me ask you about your mindset hack. How do you hack your mindset? And it could be something that you do or practice, but it could also be something that you might imagine as a mindset hack.
So I don't know if I would term this a hack, but I would say that probably the last year and a half, 2 years now, I have come to realize how much I have to work on myself. And I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way or anything, but just like the work. So it's easy, especially, as an entrepreneur, it's easy to do the work of your business, right? Like, I don't know, you're following up with a customer, you're reading a contract, you're hiring, whatever. It's easy to do the work of your business. The day, and I don't know that there was a set day, but I think over time I've come to realize that the business will never be bigger or better than my own capacity to grow and lead and vision and execute. So like I said, I don't know that it's a mindset hack, but I think it's a realization that I've come to. And that has changed the way I think about things like, leadership development. It's changed the way I think about things like coaching and accountability and support, and having a place that you can go and talk about how you're feeling, but also just like, okay, I need some accountability because otherwise I'm not going to do this thing. And so, yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know that I would call it a mindset hack.
I mean, I think that fits right in there. Yeah, it fits right in there. Yeah, because it's that awareness, that self-awareness, that you flip the switch to say, okay, I have to do this and this, So that's a great one. Yeah, that's a great one. Okay, so we've spoken all about your life and times of being in this health field. And so we always like to get to know a little bit more about who you are when you're not working. So I ask, are you a reader, a watcher, or a listener? And what are some of your favorite reads, watches, or listens? Or what else do you do in your not working time?
All the above. All the above. So I'm a very avid reader. I love reading. Favorite, I think maybe 2 favorite genres. I would say African literature and biblical fiction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I've never heard of biblical fiction.
Oh, it's good
as a genre.
Well, I don't know if that's what it's called, but that's what I call it. So maybe just, pinpointing that, for example, I think I've always been, I'm Christian, I read the Bible, but I think I've always been of the belief that, sometimes when you read the Bible, it's so easy to see only the things that are there, right? Because that's what we have. But these are real people with real lives, and there's so much context that we don't know. And so biblical fiction, at least that I've seen, and I have read a lot, is really about what are all the stories that could have been going on, the main stories.
So imagine stories of the real.
So I find it really fascinating, and I think it's fun.
Okay.
So in terms of watch, I do watch, but I've tried to cut down on that a lot. So I'm not going to talk about that. I'll watch it around. Was this, yeah. I do also really like to listen. One of my favorite podcasts has been, Diary of a CEO, just because it's, interesting. But I haven't listened to that in a while, though. I do also do a lot of audiobooks now because then at least I can multitask. Yeah, so I don't know. I definitely consume a lot of content.
Yeah.
The
Right.
the nature
Right.
of it. I don't pressure myself for all of it to be business. I love fiction. I love stories, and I enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
It's my happy place. I
Mm-hmm.
also
Mm-hmm.
write. So my
Ah.
kind of also decided that when I'm done with all this hard work I'm doing, I will go and be a fiction writer somewhere. That's my
Okay.
that's my
That's your near your moderate term vision.
yeah, let's put it that way. I would say also, like, I am a mom, so I have two kids. So there's a lot of keeping me busy that happens with parenting. And yeah,
Right.
very
Exactly.
grateful for my family.
I want to push you a little bit on biblical fiction just because I love to leave these gems for our listeners. So, are there any titles that come to mind or series that come to mind? And also on your audiobooks. Audiobooks are something I do all the time as well. So,
There's an author that I've come to really, really like, Tessa Afshar.
Tessa Afshar.
Tessa Afshar. I think kind of the Lady Francine Rivers is kind of like the sort of the earliest that I'm aware of anyway, biblical fiction writer that got me into the genre. But I've come to really like Tessa Afshar and just kind of how she writes. So I highly recommend Jewel of the Nile. I think was maybe the first one that I read, and I really liked it, and that got me into all the others. And there are many. Some are better than others, as is the case with every author. But yes, mostly really good stuff. On the business side, I've really enjoyed a few books. One that I've read, let me show you because I have it right here. Not that your listeners can see it, but it's called Finding Flow. And it's by Mihaly. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm very sorry. Starts with a C, but it's a really, really, really good book. I don't know how to describe it. It's not an easy read, but it's a small book. But it just talks about how there's nothing you can do in this world that you can't do well. And wherever you find yourself, the attention that you pay to the work that you're doing, honestly, is like the difference between just like having a great experience out of it and not. Anyway, it's a really good book. I don't know why, but I love it. And I feel like I'm reading it yearly now for the last like 3 years.
Ah, I love that.
Yeah. And then the last one,
And I'm just looking at his name, and I don't blame you.
it's a lot.
Yeah. If you've never heard it, it might be very difficult. Like it's Shishkizen Mahali.
Yeah. Good job.
Mihaly something, but it's a lot of
Well, it's a lot of consonants together. So yes, anyway,
yes,
it's
a
a
lot
good
of
book.
yes.
Highly recommend. Highly recommend. And then I think the last one that I was going to talk about has been around like just the kind of the role of a CEO. So there's one that says like the CEO only does 3 things. I quite liked that one. And then the other one was like the lazy CEO. And I think the core premise of both is really just like, how do you focus better on the things that you are supposed to do in your role as against, all the other things that oftentimes we end up doing. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, tell me about it. Those are great. Thank you. I'm glad I pushed on those. Exactly. Well, Folake, this has been so lovely. It's been great meeting you and great understanding the business about emergency response and how we're going to get it all across Africa because it's important. And so before we sign off, are there any last thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
Absolutely. So we are actively working on something that I think will be really interesting for the diaspora population. I would say an opportunity to be part of this journey, to participate in some way. So maybe I'll keep it simple and say that if anyone wants to, communicate with me, well, first of all, I'm reachable on LinkedIn, but I'm also happy to share, like, I can share, contact info with you, Florence. But like I would say like within Nigeria, in other markets, we're really, really open to exploring what the opportunities are and for other people to also participate in the work, right? So it could be as simple as, hey, you know what? I have all of my family in this place. I would love for them to get trained, right? In first aid and CPR. It could be, hey, I have a foundation, maybe like a family foundation, and we would love to put an ambulance in, this particular place. But, we want to be sure it's going to be managed well and, all of those things. We can talk about that. So There are going to be avenues. We're going to be having an event in New York in April. And so I'm happy to like share more about that as that takes shape. And I hope bring some support.
Yay. I love it. I love it. We will be following you. We will be putting the word out for any and all things that support health tech, healthcare, and thank you.
Thank you, Florence. This was really good.
Yay. All right, Glocal citizens, this has been another episode of the podcast. You can catch us Tuesdays with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcast. Please like, share, subscribe. Tell us how you like us. It's so important, folks. The same way so many of my guests say, look, let's get involved. Get involved. We want to hear from you. And so, with that said, until next time, bye for now.